Welcome back to the 40 Acres Football Podcast. Last week, it was a tough SEC championship game. Me and Joe were there. I know Robert was definitely tuned in. It was definitely an interesting game. It felt like Texas dominated in every facet and still walked away with a loss. You can be encouraged by that or you can be discouraged by that. We're going to go all through that today in this episode. For me personally, I was encouraged by that game for Texas. I think it shows what we've held true for most of the season that Texas is not going to get blown out by any one team. And in a lot of the games this year, it's felt like they've dominated and haven't necessarily put up the points on the scoreboard. But I do think that means that they're going to be competitive in every game and have a chance to win every game as the season progresses. And I think if you're a Texas fan, you have to be encouraged by that because Washington, although Texas still had a chance to win last year, kind of took it to us in the playoffs. That being said, let's go ahead and get our thoughts from Joe and Robert. How did you guys feel about the game? What were your main takeaways?
Yeah, just very disappointed in the offense. Obviously, Georgia's front seven gave it to the offensive line of Texas in the last game in Austin. We saw that, and we saw that the turnovers, of course, put the defense in a bad position in that game in Austin as well. But overall, I'm very proud of the defense. I thought they played really well. We leaned on them. Texas leaned on them rather again in this game as they have all season long, and it's just not going to cut it playing the field goal game against the Georgia Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. The red zone clearly was the key to Georgia winning this ball game, the SEC championship. The run game was almost non-existent. Of course, Quintravion Weiser had 186 yards last week against the A&M Aggies, I guess 2 weeks ago now against the A&M Aggies. And he just really couldn't get going like that as well, along with Jaden Blue. The team had 31 yards as a whole rushing. And so you weren't going to run the ball crazy against Georgia, which meant that you're going to have to find a way to punch it in through the air. And they were doing very well outside the red zone to move the ball down the field. They were dominating time of possession, but they just could not punch the ball in. Credit to Georgia's defense in that regard. But very disappointed in Ewers' as targets towards the red zone. And I also was a little bit disappointed in Steve Sarkisian that he wasn't looking towards the middle of the field in the red zone as well. He was trying to target guys on the sidelines, mainly towards the pylons, which, to be honest, I really wasn't understanding that as well. Obviously, Georgia has a really nice secondary, but I just don't understand why they're setting up cover two, mainly, to take away guys up top and you're not even looking to target someone upfield, and you have to rely on DeAndre Moore to, take the ball to the house pretty much off the slant on that crazy 41-yard touchdown. So I thought there were a lot of missed opportunities clearly for the offense. This was Texas' game to win, in my opinion. I thought that they dominated in every single facet pretty much, but the red zone was where they lost.
Yeah, I want to second that and just say this was not a productive game at all for the Longhorns. Even though the first half was slower, I still would go out and say that was their second half just because of how the defense is playing and the fact that they were winning the entire time. But I mean, I think where they go wrong in this game is the missed opportunities. Yes, Ewers had two picks, but none of those drives resulted in any points. And while those are still missed opportunities for the offense, you got to look at where else the team went wrong. I mean, six drops in the game, which was like the majority of all their drops in the entire season, two missed field goals that would have prevented the game from even going into overtime in the first place. And then also the play calling inside the red zone, especially in overtime on 1st and 10, second down. That was pretty questionable. Like when Sarkisian was choosing to have his quarterback Ewers throw the ball to the end zone, taking end zone shots. So a little bit of questionable play calling right there. And then you have things like the missed block by Jalen Gilbo. I was actually in attendance as a fan in the crowd and seeing it in person. I had the end zone view of Jahdae Barron's interception. Seeing the end zone view of that, it looked like whether Barron picked it off or not, or no, whether Gilbo blocked him or not, Barron wasn't going to be able to get to the end zone anyway. But when you look at still frames of the pick, like still frames, still photos of the pick after the fact, it looks like, wait, wow, if Jalen Gilbo kind of put a reasonable block on a reasonably good block on the defender, Barron likely would have had a straight shot into the end zone. So there's that. There's the missed field goals, the drops, the play calling, the interceptions. So I just think there was a lot of mistakes in this game where Texas really went wrong, and it wasn't really a matter of fact of they lost because Georgia just outright played better. I think that's what happened in the first game is Georgia made a lot of Georgia just played very dominantly. Texas, they made a lot of mistakes, but Georgia outright just won that game. This game, it sounds like Texas was kind of in charge in the first half. Georgia was in charge a little bit in the second half. Don't really know if they were really prepared for Gunner Stockton, but it sounds like it looks like Texas lost this rematch because of their own doing versus actually getting beats like they did in the first game.
And that's kind of the problem. It feels like every game Texas has beaten themselves in one capacity or another. Um, but also, whenever I watch the game and you look to the fourth quarter and you see two separate occasions where a Texas defender strips a Georgia offensive player, and Joe pointed it out while we were at the game, it looked like he just did a crossover. I can't remember who fumbled the first one when he just did a crossover and picked the ball back up. And then the second fumble, Michael Taft falls on the ball, but it's underneath his back and he doesn't realize the ball's there. So a Georgia player runs in and grabs the ball. And those are two plays that the defense made that in any other game, I think one of those goes Texas's way at the very least. Um, the first quarter interception from Quinn off of Isaiah Bond's shoulder, I've had so many people tell me that ball needs to be on the outside shoulder. And while I agree, there have been multiple instances over the last couple games where Isaiah Bond has run a route that has not been perfect. And I almost wonder if Quinn was expecting him to break out of that route a little bit sooner and not come so far back to the ball. Regardless, that's a ball that needs to be caught by the offensive player. And then the Matthew Golden drop in the end zone. Golden had a great game, but if we're going to criticize Quinn for having a great game and not coming away with a win and throwing a couple picks, even though he had 350 plus yards, then I think you also have to criticize Golden for not coming away with that ball in the end zone. And then, like you guys said, Steve Sarkisian's game planning, I felt was a little bit off. There was no running the ball under center. And when your offensive line, who's already down one lineman, is struggling to get any push off of Georgia's front seven, I think you have to go under center. We've seen them go under center and be successful against Kentucky, against Florida on a couple occasions. They went under center. And when you do that, you're giving your running back a larger head start at the line of scrimmage. Your offensive line has a much better shot of blowing someone off the defensive line. And so I thought it was really interesting that even though Texas could not run the football whatsoever, they wanted to stick with running out of the shotgun and out of the pistol. That didn't make any sense to me. And then Joe, like you said, so many targets up the sidelines when your one touchdown pass is a slant over the middle. I swear Texas used to run those types of plays all the time last year and the year before, but now everything is going to the boundary and defenses can key in on that. So I thought there was a lot of blame to go around, and I don't think you can blame any one department over another. But Texas had multiple chances to win, and I do think at some point those breaks are going to go Texas's way. They just haven't at this point in the season against great teams.
Yeah, like you
I,
were saying. Go
you
ahead,
got it,
Robert.
Joe. You
Yeah,
got it.
it's like it's just unreal to me how they're looking, for Gunnar Helm on the sideline, and he is feasted up the middle of the field after the catch, whether it be through the air in Michigan. He got a lot of his touchdowns in the middle of the field. Why not go
The two
after that
against
again?
Kentucky,
Yeah,
he
two
had
against
both of those.
Kentucky, one of them on fourth down, another one in the middle of the field. I just don't understand why we're targeting Gunnar Helm. Now, that ball should have been thrown better, in my opinion, obviously. But still, why are we targeting your star tight end who leads the team in receiving near the pylon? I don't understand that. So I thought that was a really funky play call. And you've seen it all game long, really in the SEC championship. But the funny thing is, Texas was still in position to possibly win this game. They still had a great opportunity, even after, outgaining Georgia by 122 yards, even after uh, having all the penalties that Steve Sarkisian was saying, I thought they should have had as well. They still had a great chance to win this game. They had it right there. And the play calling, I thought, especially in overtime, it was just the story of the game. I didn't think Texas had a chance to even stay in this ball game, putting all the pressure on their defense after that pitiful overtime drive they had to start it off. And all you have to do if you were Georgia is just protect the ball. And you can score against this defense if they have their back against the wall. So the defense can only do so much.
Yeah, I just want to hone in on the dropped passes for a second. Now, it feels like Texas has not capitalized on a lot of those easy opportunities. And I just want to, like, especially those deep balls, I want to just think about for a second how many of the games that Texas has played this season, how many of those scores would be different if a lot of those well thrown deep balls wouldn't have been dropped. I mean, for starters, we have the Matthew Golden drop in the end zone this past weekend. That score would have been way different and probably wouldn't have had to go to overtime. Then we have, you know, rewind all the way back to Mississippi State in September, Jonte Cook's drop with Arch Manning. Now Texas was going to win that game still, but the score would be different. That's a huge missed opportunity for them. Florida, DeAndre Moore's drop in the end zone. And I think there was a second drop by someone, but those are all easy, not easy. I think the DeAndre Moore one was kind of hard, but those are all catchable balls that could have changed the scores of the game before the four quarters ended. And I just want to say, like, Texas has come up with a lot of opportunities so far that they haven't seemed to fully connect on. And it seems like multiple receivers, more Cook, now Cook's not on the team anymore, but more Cook, Golden have kind of let those opportunities go. I don't want to discredit Golden because he's actually played great in the past two games, coming up with some other deep balls, actually able to haul those in. But I'm talking about opportunities here where they could have definitely scored. Those are three opportunities I'm thinking of where, you know, how different would the score have been had they caught these balls? And it's just it seems like any second now that perfect opportunity is going to come once again, whether it's against Clemson or if they win and go play Arizona State. It seems like that perfect opportunity is going to come again, and at some point, they're going to catch the ball and actually haul it in.
And also, I mean, I said this, I believe it was last week about Matthew Golden, that I thought the best thing that happened to Matthew Golden in this Texas offense, arguably, is Isaiah Bond going down because Quinn Ewers has had the chance to build up that connection with Matthew Golden. And now, obviously, we've seen a couple rough games from Bond, but Texas gets 2 weeks off before they play Clemson at home, whereas Arizona State gets 3 weeks off. They're going to go home for the holidays. And I think Isaiah Bond and Quinn Ewers will have that connection back. And if they do, then all of a sudden you've built up your connection with Matthew Golden, Gunnar Helm, and Isaiah Bond can come back at full strength. That's a lot scarier than the Texas offense we've seen over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And that's why I have a lot of confidence in this team down the line because they still have yet to put a full game together and they don't get blown out by arguably the best team in college football in Georgia, and honestly should have won that game. So when you give this team a week or two to get healthy, and then you give them a game against Clemson at home, which, barring anything crazy, that's a game Texas should win and should win by 10, 11 points. At least that's the spread right now. And if Texas is able to win that game, they have momentum going into Arizona State, and we'll be playing in the Cotton Bowl, which is essentially a home game for Texas. So they can get all of their ducks in a row and all of a sudden have a really good path in this college football playoff. And although they had a tough game against Georgia that they should have won and didn't come away with, it really doesn't matter a whole lot.
Yeah, and that's why people were talking about Bert Auburn saying maybe he might have blessed us. And by the way, listen, Auburn, I don't think, in my opinion, is necessarily an amazing kicker. I thought he's been shielded for the majority of his college career because he hasn't had a lot of high leverage kicking opportunities, but the guy still made 4 field goals. Texas wouldn't even be in the game without his made field goals. And of course, he's had to deal with scrutiny after the loss, after missing 2 field goals, one of them coming in the third quarter, another coming in the fourth.
Well,
And
and nobody's talked about if that false start on a field goal, which should never happen.
yeah, which is
You should
ridiculous.
know that right away. If that
Yeah.
false start doesn't happen, he's 5 for 6.
Yeah, for sure. And you can't be uh you could blame a lot of people like you were saying, Justin. It's never really on one person. But Bert Auburn, in my opinion, he's been very shielded throughout his career. He hasn't had a lot of high leverage moments, and that's credit to the team because this Texas roster has either blown out everybody, or they usually go for fourth down if it's a reasonable amount of goal to go or distance to go to move the chains. So he necessarily hasn't had a lot of clutch opportunities, say in the fourth quarter or overtime. The only one that comes to mind before this game was the Red River game about the year before last, where he had to make a field goal to tie the game,
Yeah.
eventually give Dylan Gabriel a chance to drive down the field. Other than that, I mean, there's not really many opportunities that the guy has had. So I thought that people may have gone a little bit too hard on the young guy, even though he's a junior. He's been in the program for a while, but it was, it was an opportunity that he wasn't really used to, I guess. So in a way, I guess it might have given Texas a better bracket in the college football playoffs, and maybe all can be forgiven if Texas can go all the way. Who knows?
And you know what? I don't know what goes through the mind of kickers. I don't. I mean, I don't know if it's a mental thing every time they line up behind the holder, even if it's just an easy chip shot that they would make in practice. I don't know how mental of a talent that is. I have to assume there's probably a good deal of easing your mind before you kick a field goal, but I mean, when it's maybe it's a like you said, Joe, with Bert Auburn not having enough high leverage kicking experience. Maybe it's the lack of that caused him to miss those 2 field goals. And yes, kicking six is a lot. Going 6 for 6 on the whole day is pretty impressive. But when you have a field goal that's about the same distance from another one that you made earlier, you would think they would make it again pretty easily, especially if it's not 40 plus yards out. Maybe it was. I don't think it was, but you would think you'd make it again. And so part of me has me thinking that part of it has me thinking that it's maybe because he hasn't had this experience with pressure before that has kind of led him to missing some of those kicks. Because we saw Bert Auburn be a great kicker last year. I don't know how many it was, but he was he was dotting up the field goal with his kicking foot. He was doing that last year, but not a lot of those kicks. Texas didn't need to win the game by a field goal last year. They lost to OU by about 4, I think, and they lost to Washington by about a touchdown. So there was never a point where Auburn had to line up and actually win the game because or tie the game because every time they won by at least a touchdown or they won by at least 4. And so basically what I'm trying to say here is, you know, those that he hasn't faced that pressure enough yet. And maybe it's because of that is there maybe it's because of that, which is why he probably missed some of those kicks that he made earlier in the game against Georgia. If y'all can kind of, I didn't do a good job of delivering that, but I think it's he hasn't had that experience yet to deliver those high leverage kicks.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I'll say this as well. On one hand, Sark has to go recruit a kicker, right? Like that's got to be done. He's got to recruit a high level kicker. You can't dominate 2 phases of the game and be decent at special teams. It feels like Texas doesn't have a great punter this year, doesn't have a great kicker, and special teams has been an Achilles heel in a couple of games now. On the flip side, Bird Auburn was 4 for 6. He would have been 5 for 6 if you take away a false start, which on a field goal should never, ever, ever happen. And then the other one he missed was from 50 or 51, and that's, I think, his career high. So then you go and you look at how he missed those kicks, and the 42 yarder that he missed and the 51 yarder. were wide by a yard, maybe two. Um, which is not a huge dispersion. And I think if you're Sark, you can live with that. College kickers have a much harder job, in my opinion, than NFL kickers because the ball is smaller. Hitting the sweet spot on the ball is actually harder in college than it is in the NFL. And that's why you see some guys that aren't super high percentage kickers in college go and be pretty good in the NFL. So that being said, I felt like Burt Auburn is getting a lot of the blame, and while I think it is warranted, I don't think that the entire game should just fall on him because putting an entire game's shoulders on a kicker is going to make that situation much worse, rather than make it better, especially heading into the most important part of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. This is definitely a test coming up for the Texas Longhorns. We'll dive more into that a little bit in the end of the podcast and more next week. But this team obviously should have won that ball game in the SEC championship, in my opinion. Some may say, they didn't really deserve anything, but the stats show they dominated pretty much in the yardage game, and obviously they didn't have a lot of penalties. Well, they had a lot of penalties that they could have not committed, but Steve Sarkisian has to find a way to keep his team level-headed, which he basically spoke about in the post-game press conference that they don't feel too wavered. You're feeling emotion, of course, because it's a big loss, and you want to, make a statement in the SEC after being in your inaugural season, along with Oklahoma. They just let it slip through their fingers, and at some point, people are going to ask, "Is this just what this offense is? Is it just who they have been all season long, or are they still, trying to piece it together, like you were saying, Justin?" So it's a very interesting thing that I'm anxious to see for this team later on. Glad they get to have at least another home game at Darrell K. Royal Stadium. That should be a rowdy game. Hopefully, people come up ready and ready to make some noise. But after that, I mean, it's go time. There is no more excuses. It's win or you're out.
Yep. And with that said, we want to leave a little to be desired for next week. So we're not going to go too heavy into the Clemson Texas matchup. But if there was one thing that worried you about this game, whether on the Texas side or the Clemson side, what would you say that is?
I'd just start off by saying one thing that worries me on the Texas side and it's been worrying me, so it's not new, is the third quarter productivity by the offense. You can score in the first quarter, you can score in the second quarter. How good are you going to be at, even if you have a lead, coming out of the locker room in the second half and actually going downfield and getting seven? Even three. I don't know how many times they've gotten three in the last 5 games in the third quarter, but that third quarter is crucial. And one thing that's worried me about Clemson is their ability to, it just seems like one of those teams that's been getting better and better as the season has progressed. We've always heard about Cade Klubnik being a great quarterback, but starting out with some, just developmental issues early on as a starting quarterback in college football. All quarterbacks in their first year starting, they make mistakes, but he's continually gotten better and better. And now Clemson can score. They really know how to score. Put up, what was it? They beat SMU 34-31, I think. So it's their ability to continually score versus Texas's inability to score in the third quarter, which is a crucial one for them. And that worries me.
What worries me is that Dabo Swinney obviously has championship pedigree as a head coach. Steve Sarkisian has won before, not to say like he's never won before. He's won as an assistant just as recently as 2020. But the fact that he has faced doubters before, Dabo Swinney, and he knows what it feels like to have people sleep on his team. And with Texas already being a 10 or 11 point favorite, as you were saying, Justin, and some people saying that Clemson is not as good as people thought they would be, and the SMU should have won that game, and they found a way to win the ACC yet again after having a disastrous way to lose against Lenora Sellers in the Palmetto Bowl. They have a chip on their shoulder for sure. Why not go into Austin and play the Longhorns for the first time ever in the history of college football? Why not have Cade Klubnik come back to his hometown and, try to beat up on the team in his hometown that he didn't commit to. They offered him, but he didn't commit to as he wanted to go to the Clemson Tigers. Why not them? That's what scares me mainly from the Clemson Tigers is that no one is going to believe they can get this job done here in DKR. Nobody is going to think that this game is really going to be close, and it's really any man's ball game. You know, people didn't think Georgia was gonna. A lot of people didn't think Georgia was gonna win the second time. Besides, if you're a Georgia fan, but Texas was favored in that game still by 2.5 points, and still wound up losing in Atlanta. So with home field advantage for the Longhorns, why not if you're the Clemson Tigers? That's what scares me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that scares me the most has to be that I mean, the team that Georgia beat at the beginning of the season, 34-3, that's not the same Clemson team that we're watching right now. And Clemson had the scare versus SMU. They had the scare versus Pitt. Obviously, they lost to South Carolina. That loss to South Carolina felt like a freak turnover. That felt like a turnover that nearly never happens. It's some rivalry voodoo magic that causes that turnover, when in reality, Cade Klubnik had led the team all the way down the field with very little time left and a chance to tie the game, go back into overtime. He did the same thing against Pitt and did the same thing against SMU. And he does not turn the ball over very much at all. Five interceptions on the season. I mean, one against South Carolina, one against Georgia. I think Texas can turn him over, but this isn't a guy that turns the ball over a whole lot. And that's really scary when you combine that with the fact that he leads game-winning drives when he has to. I compare him kind of to a Baker Mayfield in the NFL. He's not the most accurate quarterback in all of college football. He's not the best athlete in all of college football. But when you combine his two skills, um, and his athleticism and his competitiveness, that's incredibly scary. And obviously, one storyline that's been talked about is he's beaten Quinn Ewers as a junior in the state championship. Not only did he beat Quinn Ewers, they kind of took it to South Lake Carroll. So,
Oh, it wasn't close. Yeah, Westlake was a problem back then.
oh
I
yeah.
mean, they still are a problem. Shouldn't say back then,
But I
but
mean, Gatorade Player of the Year, I'm pretty sure he won that
yeah,
year. I mean,
multi-time state champion. He's also a threat with his legs, which could be a problem for the Texas defense.
I
And
don't
of
think he
course, you're
lost. Or go ahead.
go ahead.
I don't think he lost in high school except maybe once or twice.
yeah, I'm not sure
Yeah,
he lost a game. Um, and so that's really worrisome if I'm Texas. Just the fact of that you got, like Joe said, Dabo Sweeney, who has championship experience. When was the last time Steve Sarkisian beat a championship level coach in a game that they had to win? Nick Saban in
Must win.
Tuscaloosa? But is that a must-win game that early in the season? Obviously, it ended up being a huge game because they lost the Red River game.
I mean, do you consider Mike Gundy a championship level coach? I don't, he hasn't really won anything.
I
I
don't
think
know.
the last besides DeBoer and Washington last year, I think their most must win game was probably Gundy and Oklahoma State at the Big 12 championship. I
Yeah,
mean,
there's
right?
not much. I mean, there's not much. I guess examples that we can even draw from really in his tenure. He's only been here for like 5 seasons now. Is it five?
Yeah, but
So
I think back to like TCU at home. Texas needed that game to stay alive in the Big 12 hunt. I think to Georgia at home again this year. Obviously not must win, but when you haven't proven that you can beat those high level coaches, other than arguably the greatest of all time, Nick Saban, like that's a great win. But you lose to Kirby
Also,
twice. You lose to TCU at home. Last year, the loss to Kalen DeBoer, which I felt Sark got out coached in that game and out game planned in that game. So Dabo Sweeney has championship experience, and I'm not sure that I would say Steve Sarkisian does, at least as a head coach.
also heading into this game, to build on that, what is in Sarkisian's 4 years, what is his biggest win at home? Because all those biggest games we've had, Alabama at home, Georgia at home, TCU at home, they're all losses. And I think if you try to look for Sarkisian's biggest win at DKR, you're looking at at a small handful of games, which aren't really that huge of games. And you're looking at like ranked Kansas State in 2023, ranked Kansas in 2023, ranked Louisiana Lafayette in 2021. I mean, what else is
Hey,
there?
unfortunately, Robert, I think to answer your question, it might be a game where Quinn Ewers was not actually starting at quarterback would be the answer for that, and it would be the ranked Kansas State win. I think that would be the biggest win that he has had at home in his tenure. And ironically, it was not when Quinn Ewers was starting at quarterback. It was when Malik Murphy had to come in
It,
through Ewers' injury. Isn't
I
that
don't know what
crazy?
case. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep cutting
No,
everyone
go
off
ahead.
today.
No, please.
If I don't know what K-State was ranked at the time, I would agree
Sure.
with you. That is probably Sarkisian's biggest win at home, and when Malik Murphy was starting, I don't know what they were ranked at the time, but regardless, with the stakes in this, in about a week and a half, with the stakes, it being a playoff game, if Sarkisian and Ewers beat Clemson at home, that will by far be Sarkisian's biggest win at DKR so far.
100%. Easily.
It was number 25 K-State going against the number 3 Texas Longhorns. I mean, at the time, K-State was still definitely in the Big 12 title race. They were 6-2 going to this game, while the Longhorns were 7-1. Desperately needed a good game from Malik Murphy to keep the ball rolling with A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. It was a very good ball game, and you could argue that Texas might have gotten away with one as K-State was trying to punch it in,
Oh,
going from fourth down. What that game was cinema, man. That was
I,
cinema
that was a
to be in that.
fantastic game.
Man, it was
I think
phenomenal.
that was a top five game of the year in my opinion, but
That was my favorite game ever that I've had as an undergrad. Still, it still
Yeah,
is my favorite one in person,
agreed.
at least in person.
didn't feel like we won that game. But it was a
Really,
great
really
game.
doesn't. Yeah. They found a way to hold on in the red zone, which I was not expecting. I really thought after they moved the chains in overtime, they were getting ready to score and finish the ball game up, but it
Devondre
just
Sweat and Byron Murphy, man.
crazy, crazy. QB sneak merchant calling Klein, calling Will Howard to run the ball every single time. It was like third and short, so it got predictable towards the end, and they just threw it up in the fourth down in the last play of the game, and nothing was open.
It's Sark's gonna have to come through, and there's likely gonna be I'd say that you can probably predict a big red zone drive at some point in that game versus Clemson. But like I said, we want to leave a little bit to be desired about the game, so we're not going to go into a full breakdown until next week when we'll talk a lot more in depth about it. With that being said, bowl season is starting very soon. So what sicko bowl are y'all looking forward to the most?
You can take this one, Robert. You're muted. You're muted, Robert.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm going to start with the Cal Golden Bears taking on UNLV in the Art of Sport LA Bowl on Wednesday, December 18th at SoFi Stadium because Cal, a team from the ACC who very even, 500, but early in the season showing some promise, almost taking down Miami when they were up big time, and then that kind of blew up for them and they lost that game. But still a team that showed some offensive promise. We don't know how they're going to be next year. We don't know, but you'd assume some of those pieces will stay intact and they'll still be a good team. Meanwhile, UNLV competing for that Mountain West title, they did lose, but you know the caliber is there. And I think this is the matchup up until next week when we record our next episode. This is the game I'm most excited to see. I got Cal winning this one. They're gonna finally close out a big game. I got Cal winning this one. Yeah, taking down the Rebels, and then UNLV a great season, but they're not gonna walk away with a conference championship or a bowl.
I guess I'm anxious to see Tulane go against Florida. I hope DJ Lagway plays. I don't know if he will. I haven't seen anything to say that he won't, but it'd be interesting to see this Florida Gators team close out the season well after having not so much of a pleasant start to the season. Billy Napier getting called out for uh, getting called to lose his job, I guess I should say, by the Gators fans, having enough of his tenure. Because, listen, I've always been a Billy Napier guy. Even when he was at Louisiana Lafayette, I thought he was a great coach. I thought he would start off much better than he has with the Gators, but it hasn't been what you wanted or expected from him so far in his tenure. And he found a way to really start to turn the tide, and his players found a way to buy in still and support their coach, which I find very admirable. So, I hope that DJ Lagway will play in this game. It'll be December 20th against Tulane, the second team in the American. So I hope they can possibly play this game and finish out the season well. That'd be a good bowl game for me to watch.
Those are two good picks. I gotta go with, oh no, I lost the name of the bowl. What's the name of the bowl? It's something wild. It's like the IS 4S Salute to Veterans Bowl between South Alabama and Western Michigan. And you know why I'm choosing this game? Because I have been working on a Western Michigan dynasty, if y'all can see that
Bro,
screen.
you blur your
Oh
background.
no!
We can't see that. You blur your
Oh, that's
background.
tough. Um,
Just a smudge. It's just a smudge in your background, so we don't see anything.
well,
The analysis
you're
though.
gonna have to take my word that I'm rebuilding Western Michigan into a powerhouse on NCAA. But South Alabama has put up some crazy points in some games this season, beating Northwestern State 87 to 10, App State 48-14, putting up 30 in a loss to Georgia Southern, 35 in a win versus Southern Miss, 38 versus Texas State, a good Texas State team. Meanwhile, Western Michigan has put up 59, 45, 34, 42, 52, like these two teams can put up some points, man. So if you're looking for a game that has very little stakes and you want to see some points scored, I think this is the game for you. You're gonna have to take my word. Like I said before that I'm rebuilding Western Michigan. So because of that, I'm gonna go with Hayden Wolf at quarterback for Western Michigan with Brock Lowry's dual threat off the bench, kind of like an Arch Manning role, and the Western Michigan Broncos are going to take them down.
And we know who the head coach of the Jags are. The Jags is, excuse me. The Longhorn legend, Major Applewhite, former head coach of the Houston Cougars, calling a great year in offense out there in South Alabama. I wish I knew what city they played in. I don't think I know where South Alabama is in the Sun Belt. I
I have
think they
no idea.
play in, let's see, Mobile. Yeah, I passed by it before on the way to Florida. It's a pretty nice area, Mobile, Port City, of course. And South Alabama has had a very good season so far. Obviously, explosive offense, and that would be a very good game to watch, in my opinion.
It will, and I know we'll be tuned in. That being said, though, thank you as always for joining us. I'm Justin Gooseman with Joe Duffy and Robert Gonsolin. Next week, we'll have a loaded episode going over all of the playoff matchups and, in particular, Texas versus Clemson, an in-depth analysis. I'm going to be watching some film, so maybe we'll do something fun with a film breakdown. But that's going to do it for us today. Make sure to watch our other podcasts on the Burnt Orange Sports Network as always. For Justin, Joe, and Robert, y'all have a good week.